The slap landed so suddenly that my body didn't even have the chance to flinch. My spectacles flew off, shattering against the polished marble of the St. Rupert's. James' grand ballroom as 130 guests stared in stunned silence. My cheek stung, but the ache inside my chest was far worse than any sting upon my skin. Savannah Cole, my daughter-in-law, had just struck me on her own wedding day simply because I had refused to surrender the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed, her voice slicing through the room. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved toward me as I bent, trembling, to gather the fragments of my broken glasses. Some guests averted their eyes in discomfort, while others whispered behind manicured hands. But not one, absolutely not one, stepped forward to defend the humiliated old mother-in-law who had just been slapped in public. My son Daniel Whitaker stood motionless, his gaze fixed upon the floor as though I had ceased to exist. "You're not welcome here anymore," Savannah continued coolly, smoothing the folds of her flawless wedding gown. "Daniel and I need privacy to begin our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we search for something better." Every word dripped venom. For months I had endured her snide remarks about my worn-out dresses, my aging car, my simple habits. But this moment crossed a sacred boundary that should never have been touched. I rose slowly, feeling the sharp weight of every stare pierce my back. Tears slid down my face. Yet inside, something fundamental shifted. That slap wasn't merely physical, it was final. For years I had lived quietly, preferring humility over display, keeping to myself, concealing truths no one, not even my own son, had ever guessed. As I walked toward the exit, memories of recent months rushed at me like an oncoming storm. I remembered the first time Savannah had visited my apartment 2 years earlier. Her expression fell at the sight of my modest home, the old furniture, the tiny kitchen. "Seriously, this is where Daniel's mother lives," she had muttered, loud enough for me to hear. From that instant, every visit became a form of silent torture. 3 months ago, during a family dinner, she had offered her favorite suggestion. "Eleanor, you should move into a smaller place. At your age, keeping such a large apartment doesn't make sense. Besides, Daniel and I plan to start a family soon. We'll need the space." Her counterfeit smile fooled no one except my son, who seemed to lose his own will whenever she spoke, nodding along like a marionette on strings. The humiliations intensified bit by bit. First came the jabs about my wardrobe. "Eleanor, don't you have anything more modern than about my car? That old thing is dangerous. You shouldn't even drive it." Soon she criticized my part-time job at Petal and Thorn Floristry, sneering, "I don't see why a woman your age is still working instead of resting." Each phrase was a tiny, poisoned arrow aimed at my pride. My name is Eleanor Whitaker, 68 years old, a woman who has always valued discretion over spectacle. I spend 3 days a week arranging flowers, drive a decade-old sedan, and shop at discount stores. To outsiders, especially to Savannah, I appear to be a modest widow living on a fixed income. But that is precisely the image I have crafted with care for decades. None of those pitying eyes in that ballroom knew that my life had once been entirely different. My late husband, Richard Whitaker, had not been the ordinary office clerk everyone assumed. Together, we had deliberately chosen simplicity, hiding our true wealth to preserve privacy, a choice that now felt almost prophetic. As I stepped out of the ballroom, the buzz of whispered judgments clung to me like a toxic fog. "Poor thing. She looks so fragile," murmured Savannah's aunt. "The bride is right, she can't take care of herself," added one of Daniel's cousins. "She should be in a retirement home instead of living alone," said another with false sympathy. Every comment burned like acid on open wounds. The chill of the air conditioning contrasted cruelly with the fire in my chest. My hands shook as I searched my worn black purse, one I had carried for 5 years. Not out of need, but because I valued practicality over appearances. something Savannah would never grasp. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. One I had avoided for over a year, hoping it would never be necessary. "Marcus." "It's Eleanor," I said, my voice trembling yet steady underneath. "Come to St. Delt, James' Grand Ballroom right now. Bring the documents we discussed. It's time they learned the truth." "Are you certain?" "Mrs. Whitaker," Marcus Reed's professional yet concerned voice came through the receiver. "Once we take this step, there's no turning back." I looked one last time toward the ballroom. Through the glass doors, I could see Savannah laughing with her friends, likely boasting about putting her useless mother-in-law in her place. Daniel stood beside her, smiling weakly without a trace of remorse. "Completely sure," I replied. 30 minutes. "Marcus." "No more." I ended the call and walked toward my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was ready to remove the mask I had worn to protect my family. For the first time, they would see the real Eleanor Whitaker. And when that happened, when truth shattered their polished illusions, they would finally comprehend the true meaning of regret. The parking lot was still illuminated by street lamps that stretched long shadows across the rows of cars. I sat inside my old sedan and waited 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to realize the enormity of the mistake they had made by humiliating the very woman who had secretly supported them far more than they would ever know. While I waited, memories poured back like an unstoppable tide. It had all begun 2.5 years earlier, when Daniel came to my apartment wearing the nervous smile I remembered from his boyhood. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special," he had said. And there she was, Savannah Cole, with her perfectly styled hair, designer outfit, and a smile that never reached her eyes. From that very first moment, I sensed that something was off. The way she surveyed my home, appraising every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. "How cozy," she had murmured, glancing at my secondhand furniture and my son's faded curtains. Her tone, of course, meant the opposite. Daniel, blinded by what he thought was love, failed to notice the condescension dripping from her voice. That first dinner had been a silent catastrophe. Savannah barely touched the food I had prepared with love, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked about her family, she dodged the questions, though not before prying into my finances with disarming curiosity. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension?" "Eleanor, it must be difficult living on so little," she said, feigning concern. She never realized that I was studying her as closely as she was studying me. Over the following months, patterns emerged that set off alarm bells in my mind. During each visit, Savannah remarked on how outdated everything seemed, insisting that I deserved better in my golden years. Yet her eyes always lingered on what truly mattered: the prime location of my building, the wide balcony view, the generous size of the rooms. One afternoon, while Daniel was in the bathroom, I overheard her whispering on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, Mom, his mother's apartment is in an extremely expensive area. If I can get her to downsize, we could stay here for a while. She's so naive, she'll probably thank us for helping her transition." Her words cut straight through me like a blade. But when she returned, I wore a mask of calm civility. From that day onward, every encounter with Savannah became a calculated performance. She posed as the caring daughter-in-law concerned for my welfare, while I played the frail older woman needing guidance. Inside, however, I was observing, collecting information, deciphering her motives. It was a chess match where both of us believed we held the advantage. Her manipulation grew bolder with time. First came the subtle hints: "Eleanor, I've seen such charming retirement apartments, all-inclusive and worry-free." Then, the open pressure: "You shouldn't live alone at your age. What if you fall and no one finds out for days?" Each argument was designed to erode my confidence, to convince me of helplessness. Even Daniel, my own son, began parroting her lines like a trained bird. "Mom, Savannah's right. Maybe you should think about a smaller place." Watching him transform into that woman's echo was more painful than any insult. The boy I had raised with love and sacrifice now viewed me as an obstacle rather than a mother. Their campaign escalated after the engagement announcement. Their visits increased but turned tense. Savannah began bringing glossy real estate brochures for senior communities. "I'm just exploring options for you, Eleanor," she would say, spreading them across my coffee table like a business pitch. But I had my own plans. One afternoon, while they were out running wedding errands, I called an old friend from the property world. "Brenda, I need you to look into something," I said. "A couple very interested in my apartment. I want to know their real financial standing." What she found chilled me. Savannah and Daniel were drowning in debt. Their lavish wedding would cost more than $50,000, financed entirely through credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they rented was on the brink of eviction. Their expensive cars were leased with payments they could barely cover. Their entire lifestyle was a house of cards held together by denial. Suddenly, everything clicked: the rush to marry, the insistence that I move, the constant insinuations about my supposed fragility. This wasn't love binding them, it was desperation. And my apartment, located in one of Riverton's most desirable districts, was their lifeline. The revelation struck like a second slap. My son, the child I had raised with honesty and discipline, had chosen deceit and manipulation instead. He had allowed an ambitious woman to turn his own mother into a target for exploitation. In the weeks leading to the wedding, their efforts became shameless. "Eleanor, you can't stay this selfish," Savannah had said 3 days before the ceremony. "Daniel and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with a place to live." There was no longer even a pretense of affection, only a demand masked as family duty. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I called Marcus Reed, my financial advisor, the only man I had trusted completely since Richard's death. "Marcus, I need you to prepare certain documents." I told him, "It may soon be time to reveal information I've kept hidden for years." He grew serious immediately. "Mrs. Whitaker, are you sure this is the right time once this becomes public? There's no reversing it. The consequences could be severe for family ties." But my resolve was firm. The family I had protected with silence had betrayed me. And now, sitting in my car in the St. Tin, James Grand Ballroom parking lot, awaiting Marcus with the papers that would alter everything, I knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. 25 more minutes, I thought. And Savannah, Daniel, and all those pitying guests would learn who Eleanor Whitaker truly was. 25 more minutes until their pretty worlds built on greed collapsed like castles made of sand. A soft night breeze stirred the trees, scattering shifting shadows under the lamps. It felt strangely poetic that on such a beautiful evening, so many illusions would die. 20 minutes had already passed since my call, and each second stretched like an eternity. From my car, I could see the ballroom's golden lights, hear the laughter spilling from its open windows. In just a few minutes, that celebration would become a nightmare for its principal characters. I closed my eyes and let the painful memories wash over me once more, reminding myself why there could be no turning back. The gravest humiliation had come 2 weeks before the wedding. During what Savannah called a family meeting, she had arrived at my apartment accompanied by Daniel and her parents, an ambush perfectly staged. "Eleanor, we want to discuss your future," began Savannah's mother, a haughty woman who regarded me as if I were a bothersome insect. "We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life," added her father, a burly man who surveyed my home with the calculating eyes of an appraiser. "At your age, living alone in such a big place isn't only unnecessary, it's risky. What if you suffer a medical emergency and no one notices for days? Their lines were too polished to be spontaneous. Daniel remained silent, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing my son seated among those who viewed me as an obstacle felt like watching the light of my life extinguish before my eyes. "Mom," he finally said, in a voice I barely recognized. "They're right. Savannah and I have talked, and it would be better for everyone if you moved somewhere more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age," I repeated, feeling anger simmer inside me. "And who decides what's appropriate, you?" Savannah's mother exchanged a knowing glance with her husband, as though my reaction confirmed what they had expected. "Eleanor, we understand this is difficult, but you must think about what's best for Daniel and Savannah," she insisted. "What's best for them?" I murmured, finally grasping the full extent of the scheme woven behind my back. "Let me guess, my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life." The silence that followed said everything. They had rehearsed every line, every manipulation, every tactic. Savannah took over then, launching into her performance of concern. "Eleanor, it's not just about the apartment, it's about your well-being. We found a wonderful residence for people your age, 24-hour medical care, social activities, meals prepared for you. You could make friends who understand what you're going through." Her smile made my stomach turn. "What I'm going through?" I asked, feigning confusion. "And what exactly do you think I'm going through?" "Savannah." She looked toward Daniel for support before replying. "Well, loneliness, financial insecurity, the fear of being unable to care for yourself. It's perfectly normal at your age. Eleanor, you shouldn't feel ashamed of needing help." The audacity of that 28-year-old telling me what was normal at my age left me momentarily speechless. Then I saw something in her eyes that froze me, the absolute conviction that she had the right to control my life, my home, my choices. To her, I wasn't a person anymore, but an obstacle to remove. "We've run the numbers," her father said, producing a folder prepared in advance. "The residence costs about $2,500 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have plenty to cover that for years. And some extra to, well, help Daniel and Savannah with their starting expenses." There it was, the naked truth. It wasn't about my safety or comfort. It was about money, about liquidating my home to fund their collapsing lifestyle. And if I refuse, I asked, though I already knew. "Eleanor," Daniel replied in a practiced tone, "we hope it won't come to drastic measures. But if your mental health deteriorates to where you can't make sound decisions," the threat hung in the air, unmistakable. If I didn't yield, they would find legal means to declare me incompetent. They had researched, planned, prepared every step to seize what was mine if persuasion failed. Then by force. And my son, whom I had loved beyond measure, sat there allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left, and I stood by my refusal, I wept for the first time in years, not from sorrow, but for the final burial of the illusions I had clung to about my family. I phoned Marcus Reed at once. Through tears, I told him, "I need you to investigate something urgently. I want to know the exact financial reality of my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts. Income. Liabilities, everything." The outcome of that inquiry was devastating. Daniel earned $45,000 a year as a sales manager. Yet he carried more than $80,000 in credit card debt. Savannah worked part-time as an image consultant, perhaps making $4,000 annually, but she spent as though she drew an executive salary. Combined, they owed over $120,000, not including the loans they had taken out for the wedding. Their rental apartment, at $2,000 a month, was 3 months in arrears. The cars they drove were financed with payments that devoured about 60% of their joint income. Their primary credit card was maxed out, and they had begun taking cash advances to service other debts. They were in a financial tailspin, and my apartment represented the only rope they believed could stop the fall. Yet there was something else in Marcus's report that splintered my heart. For the past 6 months, Daniel had been calling banks and insurance companies to inquire about loans secured by his elderly mother's property. He had been asking about the procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my methodical dispossession for months. The cruelest detail came at the end of the report, according to a private investigator Marcus had retained. Savannah had been telling friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older teen, less handsome man because his mother owned valuable assets and had no competing heirs. For her, marrying Daniel was not love, it was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation became the final blow. For weeks I had considered simply revealing my true finances, thinking the shock might make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that file, I understood this was not about need or desperation. It was about cold, calculated greed that had twisted my son until I could hardly recognize him. The days before the wedding were torture. Every call from Daniel was fresh pressure to change my mind. Every visit from Savannah came laced with poisonous jabs about my stubbornness and selfishness. They began treating me as though I were already a senile woman whose opinions carried no weight. The night before the wedding, Daniel made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Savannah only wants what's best for all of us." Those words confirmed what I had feared. I had already lost my son. The man marrying the next day was no longer the boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. And now, sitting in my car and waiting for Marcus, I recognized that everything had led to this unavoidable moment. It wasn't revenge or cruelty. It was justice. It was about showing them what consequences look like. It was about teaching them that some boundaries must never be crossed. 15 more minutes, I told myself, and everything would change. My hands shook as I dialed Harold Bennett, my next-door neighbor at Mapleview Residences, a 70-year-old man who had quietly witnessed the tense visits of recent months. "Harold, it's Eleanor. I need a very important favor," I said, my voice unsteady. "Could you go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk?" "Yes. Right now. It's urgent." Harold had been like a brother to me since Richard passed, and I knew I could trust him to act without questions. While I waited, I remembered a conversation we'd had only a week earlier. From his balcony, he had seen Savannah arrive with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. "Eleanor, that girl brought a man with a briefcase measuring your apartment from the outside," he'd said, worry heavy in his voice. When they saw me, they slipped away. "I don't like any of this." Harold had been the first to notice the subtle shifts in Daniel's behavior. "Your son doesn't greet me the way he used to," he observed. "He used to stop and chat when he visited. Now he rushes in and out as if he's ashamed of something." His words confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap. The folder I asked Harold to fetch contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property titles, investment records that Richard and I had guarded for decades, papers proving that the poor widow on a modest pension was, in truth, a woman with means enough to alter lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Harold appeared in the parking lot, the folder in hand. "Ellie, what's happening? You look shaken," he said, passing me the documents. "It's about Daniel's wedding," I replied, giving him a brief account of what had transpired in the ballroom. I watched his face harden with each detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always suspected as much." "Harold, in a few minutes, a man named Marcus will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting right here," I asked. "And Harold, after tonight, many things will change. You have always been like family to me." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. "You're family to me too. Eleanor, do what you must. When he returned to the building, I opened the folder and began reviewing paperwork I had not touched in months. The first was a bank statement reflecting an investment account balance of $5,400,000. The second was the title deed to a downtown office tower Whitaker Center that brought in monthly rents of $50,000. The third was the deed to Seabrook Cove House, a beach property I had purchased as an investment 10 years earlier. Richard had been a quiet genius with investments, growing a small import firm into a discreet empire. Together, we chose to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family's safety. Visible wealth attracts problems, he used to say. Invisible wealth gives you power. I never imagined I would need to use that power against my own son. Every document represented years of discipline and careful choices. My shifts at Petal and Thorn Floristry 3 days a week were not about money, but about staying active and connected to my community. The old car I drove was not a sign of lack. It was a lesson learned that unnecessary showiness attracts trouble. As for my apartment, the one Savannah coveted, it was actually the least valuable asset in my portfolio. I kept it not for its price, but for its memories. It was where Richard and I spent our last years, where we dreamed together, where he died in my arms after a brave fight with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Daniel and Savannah. For the last 3 years, since my son's finances began to crumble, I had been quietly paying many of his debts. Those work bonuses he thought covered his credit cards came from my account. That special rent discount he believed he had negotiated with his landlord was, in truth, a monthly transfer I arranged. Without Daniel's knowledge, I had been subsidizing his irresponsibility for years. The upscale apartment he lived in, the car he drove. Even some of the costs of the wedding unfolding at that very moment had been made possible by my clandestine support. I thought I was helping my son through a rough season, not realizing I was funding his transformation into someone I barely knew. The banking records showed regular transfers totaling $4,500 a month, money he imagined came from bonuses or tax refunds, when in reality it was a mother shielding her child from the consequences of his own choices. The irony was brutal. While Savannah mocked me as a burden on their future, I was literally the reason they could afford that future at all. As they plotted to strip me of my home to solve their financial mess, I had been solving that mess in secret for years. I closed the folder and glanced back toward the ballroom. The lights still glowed. The music still played. The guests still celebrated. But in less than 5 minutes, Marcus would arrive with the final papers I needed. In less than 5 minutes, I would begin severing every last financial thread I had woven to protect a son who had chosen betrayal. This is not revenge. I told myself, this is justice. This is the lesson that actions have consequences, that greed carries a cost. That family is not a commodity to be sold for convenience. I had shielded Daniel from reality for too long, and that protection had warped him into a stranger. Headlights swept across the lot, bleaching the night for a heartbeat. It was Marcus, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything. I stepped out of my car and walked toward him, feeling each stride carry me away from the woman I had been and nearer to the woman I would now become. Mrs. Whitaker, Marcus said, climbing out with a legal brief under his arm. Are you absolutely sure once we step inside? There will be no undoing what follows. I looked toward the ballroom one final time, imagining my son and his new wife basking in what they believed was a triumph over the useless old woman they had just humiliated. I have never been more certain. Marcus, I said, it is time they meet the real Eleanor Whitaker. Under the parking lot lights, Marcus opened his folder and, with his usual efficiency, it displayed the papers he had prepared. Mrs. Whitaker, here is the order to immediately suspend all bank transfers you have been making in Daniel Whitaker's name, he said, tapping the first page. Here as well is the notice canceling the lease, guarantee you provided confidentially. The landlord will be served tomorrow morning. I accepted the documents with trembling but resolute hands. Each page was one strand of the safety net I had woven for years. And now I was cutting those strands, one by one. "What about the ballroom payment?" I asked, though I already knew. "Cancelled," Marcus confirmed. "The deposit you guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They will have until tomorrow to provide an alternative form of payment." A cold wave of reality washed over me. For 3 years, I had been the invisible net beneath Daniel and Savannah. Their apartment. His car. Even tonight's celebration, everything had been propped up by my hidden support. And now, in a single night, I would remove it all for good. "Marcus, I want you to understand," I said, signing each page with a steadiness I had not felt in years. "This is not cruelty or spite. This is the only way they will learn the real value of things. For too long I protected them from consequences, and that protection turned them into people I do not recognize. I understand completely." "Mrs. Whitaker," he replied, sincere respect in his tone. "In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I have watched families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you are doing requires more courage than most possess." His words gave me the final strength to take the last step. We walked side by side toward the entrance. My heartbeat quickening not from fear, but from a strange mix of grief for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to reclaim: my dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being rather than a resource. The music cut off abruptly as we entered the St. W. James Grand Ballroom. 130 faces swung toward us, confusion rippling across the crowd. Some recognized Marcus at once. He had managed the finances of several prominent families in Riverton for decades, and his presence at a party usually signaled that something consequential was underway. Savannah reacted first. "What are you doing here?" "Eleanor," she shouted from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing with Daniel. "You already left once." "Wasn't that enough drama for one evening?" Her voice carried that familiar arrogance, though I caught a thin thread of unease beneath it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced in a clear, professional tone. "Forgive the interruption, but I have urgent legal matters to address with Mr. Daniel Whitaker and Mrs. Savannah Cole." The hush that followed was so complete you could hear the air conditioning hum. Guests began pulling out their phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Daniel approached slowly, color draining from his face. "What is happening?" "Mom?" he asked, sounding far less assured than he had minutes earlier when he stood by during my humiliation. "Who is this man? And why is he talking about legal matters?" His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous habit from childhood. "Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "This is Marcus Reed, my financial and legal advisor. He has documents you will find enlightening." Marcus opened his folder and withdrew the first notice. "Mr. Whitaker, you are hereby informed that the financial guarantee your mother provided for your lease has been revoked with immediate effect. Your landlord will be notified in the morning, and you will have 30 days to secure a new guarantor or vacate the premises." The last hint of color left Daniel's face. "Financial guarantee," he whispered, looking at me with dawning horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see in his eyes that part of him had always suspected the truth and chosen not to ask. "Additionally," Marcus continued without pause, "the monthly transfers of $4,500 your mother has been sending to your accounts are permanently suspended. This includes payments covering credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses you believed were coming from other sources." Savannah gasped, the sound echoing through the hall. "That's impossible!" she cried, hurrying toward us with her train scraping the floor. "Daniel doesn't have a rich mother. Look at how she lives, her clothes, her car. She's an old woman on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was unmistakable, and a growing murmur passed through the guests. Finally, Marcus said, lifting the last paper, The guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been canceled. Management will be entitled to demand full payment before guests are permitted to leave this evening." His words detonated in the ballroom, and I watched several guests drift uneasily toward the exits. The truth struck Daniel like a hammer. "You!" he whispered, staring at me as if he could not process the words. "All this time, you've been paying for everything. For 3 years." "Daniel?" I answered, my voice oddly calm after the storm I had weathered. 3 years when I believed I was helping you through a difficult season. 3 years when I hoped you would find your way back to the man I raised. 3 years when I trusted you would remember the values I taught you." Savannah began pacing in small, frantic circles, clutching her head. "This cannot be happening. This cannot be real," she screamed, as the guests watched, torn between horror and morbid fascination. "You're a poor old woman. You work in a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car. You cannot have money. Appearances mislead." "Savannah," I replied at last, feeling the curtain fall on decades of carefully maintained simplicity. "For years I lived quietly because Richard and I believed visible wealth invites trouble. We were right, only the trouble came from where we least expected." The music was fully silenced now. The only sounds were the ragged breaths of the newlyweds and the rising murmur of onlookers who realized they were witnessing something no one had anticipated. Some had already begun recording on their phones, instinctively aware this story would become local legend. "Mom," Daniel said, voice cracking, "please, there must be a way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he finally grasped the magnitude of what he had lost, not merely money or a safety net, but his mother, the woman who had loved him without condition for 35 years. "The only way to repair this, Daniel," I answered, "was never to shatter it in the first place." The hush inside the ballroom turned punishing. 130 guests held their breath as they absorbed what I had said. Savannah stood rigid for the first time all evening, her eyes flicking between Marcus, the papers in his hand, and my face, as if hunting for a fissure in the reality caving in around her. Daniel only stared at me with an expression I will never forget, a blend of shock, belated understanding, and absolute horror. "Mrs. Whitaker," Marcus said in a voice meant for the entire room to hear, "shall I proceed with the full financial details?" His question hung above the newlyweds like a blade. I noticed several guests edging closer, spellbound by the spectacle unfolding before them. "Please, Marcus," I replied with a calm I did not know I possessed. "Everyone deserves the whole truth." Savannah tried to cut in with a desperate shriek, but Marcus raised a hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon beginning a delicate procedure. "Over the last 36 months, he said, scanning his documents, "Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker has transferred a total of $162,000 to underwrite the living expenses of her son, Daniel Whitaker, and his fiancée. This amount includes $48,000 for rent, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous costs." A rippling murmur swept the ballroom. Some guests traded looks of astonishment, others quietly opened their phones to run the arithmetic. Savannah's mother, who had remained seated at the head table through the confrontation, rose slowly, her face drained of color. Furthermore, Marcus pressed on, relentless. "Mrs. Whitaker personally guaranteed the entire cost of this celebration ballroom. Food, music, flowers, and photography for a total of $53,000. Those funds, as stated earlier, are no longer available." Savannah finally located her voice, though what came out was closer to a wail than coherent words. "This is impossible. It is a lie. No one with that much money would live like a pauper. She turned toward the crowd as if searching for allies, and found only fascinated faces, some even faintly amused by her panic. "My dear Savannah," I answered, my composure a stark counterpoint to her hysteria. "You have learned a costly lesson about judging by appearances. For years, Richard and I chose simplicity because we valued privacy over display. It proved to be a very wise choice." Daniel at last moved, approaching me in tentative steps. "Mom, please. There must be an explanation. There has to be a way to fix this. You cannot destroy my life like this." His voice cracked on the final word. And for a heartbeat, a pang of maternal grief nearly undid me. "Destroy your life," I repeated, feeling anger heat my voice again. "I am destroying your life. Was it not your wife who struck me before 130 people? Were you not the one who stood by in silence while I was shamed? Were you not the one who planned to strip me of my home?" The accuracy of those questions tolled through the ballroom like church bells. Several guests nodded, remembering the scene that had ignited all of this. Some even held phones containing the video of Savannah's slap, digital proof of the cruelty that triggered tonight's reckoning. "But that was different," Daniel muttered, though conviction deserted him. "We did not know. We did not understand. We thought you really needed help." The excuses sounded hollow even to him, and I saw contemptuous glances traded around the room. "You did not know," I said, my voice rising for the first time all night. "You did not know you were orchestrating a family ambush to force me to sell my home. You did not know you brought in an appraiser behind my back. You did not know you were researching legal avenues to have me declared incompetent if I refused." With every question, Daniel's shoulders sagged a little more. Marcus seized the moment and pulled another paper from his folder. "Mr. Whitaker, I must also inform you that your mother has amended her will. All assets previously designated for you have been redirected to charities that protect seniors from familial abuse." The announcement landed like a silent explosion. Savannah reeled backward as if struck. "You cannot do that," she shrieked, her mask of poise finally collapsing. "We are your family. Daniel is your only son." "A petty quarrel," I echoed, letting the words dangle in the dense air. "Is that how you describe a conspiracy to take an old woman's home? Is that what you call slapping your husband's mother on your wedding day?" My voice had gone cold, and I saw more than one guest flinch. Savannah's father, mute until then, edged forward with the brittle calm of a man realizing he had backed the wrong horse. "Mrs. Whitaker," he ventured, "emotions are high. Perhaps we could discuss this privately once everyone has settled down." "There is nothing to settle in private," I replied, steady and firm. "What needed saying has been said here, before the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You made this public. My response will remain public." Guests' heads swung between us as though watching a tennis match, riveted by every volley. Marcus snapped his folder shut, the sound cracking through the room. "Mrs. Whitaker, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects begin immediately." He turned to Daniel and Savannah, professional but not without a trace of satisfaction. "I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible." Savannah folded. She dropped into a nearby chair and sobbed, her cries ricocheting off the high ceiling. "Everything is ruined," she choked. "Everything we planned. Everything we worked for, it is all destroyed." Her gown, flawless at the start of the evening, now lay wrinkled and blotched with tears. "No," I said, stepping toward her for the first time since the slap. "What lies in ruins are the deceptions, the greed, and the disrespect. What has crumbled is the illusion that you can treat people like possessions and evade the consequences." I stopped before her, holding her gaze. "This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." Daniel joined his wife and set a trembling hand upon her shoulder. "Savannah, we have to find a way to fix this. There must be something we can do." But even as he spoke, I saw in his eyes the knowledge that it was too late. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. There is a way to mend this. Daniel, I said, meeting his eyes for the first time in months without flinching. Learn from it. Grow from it. Become the people I hoped you would be before greed unmade you. My voice softened. Because despite everything, he was still my son. But that growth must happen without my money, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. You will have to do it the hard way, as everyone else does. Silence settled over the ballroom again, the kind that accompanies endings. Every person present knew they were witnessing the definitive severing of a family bond. Marcus and I turned toward the exit, leaving behind a room full of stunned guests and a pair of newlyweds whose perfect facade had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. As we walked, a voice I did not expect cut through the quiet. Wait, Eleanor. It was Natalie Whitaker, Daniel's younger sister, who had sat at a back table all evening. She ran toward us, eyes brimming, horror written across her face. Aunt Eleanor, Natalie said, her voice shaking. I did not know. I swear Daniel never told me what they planned to do to you. She had always been my favorite niece, a 29-year-old teacher who stayed close to me even after Daniel pulled away. If I had known, I would have tried to stop them. I paused and looked at her, the same steady honesty I had known since she was a child shining in her eyes. I know. Natalie, I said softly, touching her cheek. You have always been different. You have never treated people as opportunities to exploit. Her tears fell harder. Grief for her brother's choices etched on her face. But why did you never tell us about the money, she asked, plainly baffled. Why keep all of this secret for so many years? It was a question that deserved a candid answer, especially from someone who had shown me only respect and genuine love. Because Richard and I learned long ago that money changes people, I explained, aware of guests inching closer to listen. We have seen families destroyed by inheritances, friendships ruined by loans, and children who come to view parents as walking pensions. We chose simplicity to protect the relationships that truly mattered. Natalie nodded slowly, beginning to grasp the wisdom behind our decision. But Daniel, he used to be different. When we were kids, he would have defended anyone who hurt you. What happened to him? Her question carried all the sorrow of a sister watching her brother become unrecognizable. What happened was, Savannah, I said sadly, without bitterness. What happened was greed dressed as love, ambition without values, and my own mistake of protecting him so long that he never had to learn responsibility and consequences. The words seemed to resonate through the ballroom. People were still hanging on every syllable. Marcus, who had respectfully stepped back during our exchange, leaned in to murmur in my ear, Mrs. Whitaker, the ballroom manager is approaching. It appears he has learned of the canceled guarantee. Indeed. A burly man in a suit strode toward us with several papers in his hands and a very grave expression. Mrs. Whitaker, he said tensely, I have just received an irregular notice of payment cancellation. The contract for this celebration was guaranteed through tomorrow morning. May I ask what is going on? His presence injected an immediate layer of reality into the crisis I had set in motion. Mr. Caldwell, I replied, recalling his name from our private arrangements. The financial guarantee I provided has been revoked due to extraordinary circumstances that came to light this evening. I gestured toward Daniel and Savannah, who still stood in the center of the ballroom like statues of despair. I understand, Caldwell said, taking in the scene with the practiced eye of a man who had stewarded countless events. Who will be responsible for payment now? The outstanding total is $53,000. Ballroom, catering, music, flowers, photography. His tone was professional but firm. Someone would have to address this immediately. Daniel found his voice, shuffling toward us. Mr. Revin, Caldwell, there must be some mistake. My mother, she cannot just cancel the payment. We are family. We can resolve this." His voice carried a desperation I had never heard from him before, the desperation of a man finally grasping his predicament. "Young man," Caldwell replied with the strained patience of a professional. "The financial guarantee was provided personally and privately by Mrs. 2R. Whitaker. She is within her legal rights to withdraw it at any time. I now require an alternative form of payment immediately, or I will have to suspend the event." Savannah stumbled forward, gown disheveled, makeup streaked with tears. "You cannot do this," she shouted at Caldwell. "It is our wedding day. You cannot ruin it over money." Her hysteria grew, and guests murmured with mounting discomfort. "Ma'am," Caldwell said, firmer now, "I am not ruining anything. I am enforcing the contract you signed. If you cannot provide payment at once, I must ask your guests to leave and suspend all services." His ultimatum fell like a gavel. The reality sank in. Some guests collected their bags and drifted toward the doors. Others stayed, transfixed by the unfolding wreck. Like onlookers unable to look away from a crash. "Mom," Daniel said, drawing near with tears in his eyes for the first time since childhood. "Please. I know we did wrong. I know we hurt you. But there are 130 people here. There are photographs. There are memories. You cannot destroy all of this over a fight." For a moment, I glimpsed the boy he had been. "Daniel," I answered with a calm that surprised even me. "I am not destroying anything. You destroyed this when you chose greed over love, manipulation over honesty, and humiliation over the respect I deserve as your mother." Each sentence was a blade, but the kind that cuts away a poisoned vine. "But what are we supposed to do?" Savannah asked, panic rising as she looked at the thinning crowd. "How do we explain this? How do we pay for all of it? You will do what responsible people do." I said, "You will earn money honestly. You will learn to live within your means. You will discover what it is to work hard for what you want instead of expecting others to supply it." My voice grew steadier as decades of hard-won wisdom found air. Marcus stepped close and murmured, "Mrs. Whitaker, the legal process is complete. All documents have been delivered. There is nothing more for us to do here." The meaning was clear. It was time to leave and let them face the results of their choices without my presence as a shield. Natalie returned and threw her arms around me. "Aunt Eleanor, you will always have my respect and my love, no matter what happens with Daniel." Her words salved a deep wound, reminding me that not every bond had been corroded by greed. "And you will always have mine," I told her, returning the embrace. "Remember this night when you make the big decisions of your life. Remember that character is defined not by what we possess, but by how we treat the people we love." Her tears dampened my shoulder as she nodded. Fully absorbing the lesson playing out before her, Caldwell approached again. Urgency, sharpening his tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need an immediate resolution. I have other events this evening, and I cannot keep staff on indefinitely without a guarantee." His professional patience was nearly spent, adding pressure to an already desperate moment. "You have my number," I said to Daniel and Savannah one last time. "When you are ready for a real conversation about respect, values, and responsibility, when you have learned what it means to earn your way, when you can look me in the eye and offer a genuine apology for what you did tonight, then we can talk." "But first," I added, meeting their gaze, "you will need to resolve the mess you created here on your own." With that, I turned and walked out with Marcus, leaving behind a ballroom crowded with chaos, despair, and the cold clarity of deserved consequences. 3 days after the wedding, my apartment had become a refuge of peace I had not felt in years. Harold came by each morning with coffee and pastries from the neighborhood bakery, making sure I was all right after what he called the night Eleanor reclaimed her dignity. His visits were balm to my soul, proof that chosen family still saw my worth. The phone rang incessantly during those 3 days. Daniel called 37 times. his messages shifting from initial fury to frantic pleas. Savannah sent 14 texts, each more hysterical than the last. Her parents appeared at my door twice, demanding I fix the mess I had made. But I held my ground with a calm that surprised even me. That morning, Marcus arrived with news that, though anticipated, was crushing in its scope. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said as we drank tea on my balcony, "I have reports from every front. Daniel and Savannah were evicted from their apartment yesterday morning. The ballroom has already begun legal action to recover the $53,000 outstanding. Their credit cards were canceled for non-payment." "And where are they staying now?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "With Savannah's parents." Marcus answered, "It is a 2-bedroom place that already houses 3 people. The situation is tense." His look implied that tense was a generous understatement. That afternoon, while I watered the balcony plants, a familiar car pulled to the curb. It was Natalie. But she was not alone. Amelia, my longtime friend from real estate, stepped out as well. And to my surprise, Harold climbed from the back seat. "Ellie," Natalie called from the sidewalk. "We need to talk. There are things you must hear." When they reached my door, the urgency and worry written on their faces put me instantly on guard. "Aunt Eleanor," Natalie began, "I have been digging into a few things since the wedding night, things you need to know before it is too late." She sat on my sofa with a folder that looked every bit as official as the one Marcus had carried into the ballroom. Too late for what I asked. Pouring tea and fighting to keep my hands steady, Amelia cleared her throat and spoke for the first time. "Eleanor, these last 3 days I have investigated Daniel and Savannah's finances. What I uncovered goes well beyond anything we imagined." She opened the folder, revealing documents that turned my stomach. "They have been laying groundwork for more than a year," she continued. "I found proof that Savannah consulted attorneys who specialize in mental competency cases involving elders. They developed a step-by-step plan to have you declared legally incompetent and seize control of all your assets." Harold, silent until then, leaned in with a grave expression. "There is more. Eleanor, the night you left the ballroom, I overheard Savannah on the phone. She said the old woman had ruined everything, but they still had Plan B." "Plan B," I repeated, my gut twisting with anger and fear. Natalie took my hand and squeezed. "Aunt Eleanor, they have been telling people you are going senile, that your behavior at the wedding proved you have lost touch with reality. They are assembling a case to convince a judge you cannot manage your own affairs." The magnitude of their betrayal spread through me like an infection. Public humiliation. Months of plotting to pry me from my home. A long conspiracy against me, and now my justified response twisted into alleged evidence of incompetence. The malice outstripped anything I had imagined. "And that is not the end of it," Amelia added, her voice trembling. "Savannah has been circulating rumors around the neighborhood about your supposed erratic behavior. She has visited several neighbors, encouraging them to report anything concerning they notice." The methodical nature of the smear left me breathless. Marcus, returning for our scheduled meeting, stepped into an atmosphere dense with tension. "Mrs. Whitaker, I see you have heard part of the latest maneuvering." His face was more serious than I had ever seen it. "I have additional news confirming what your friends discovered. Daniel filed a preliminary petition yesterday." He opened his folder. "He is asking the court to evaluate your mental capacity based on what he calls irrational conduct and reckless financial choices. He has attached sworn statements from several wedding guests." "Sworn statements?" I asked, anger overtaking shock. "What on earth do they claim Marcus scanned the pages?" "Assertions that you launched an unjustified emotional attack against an innocent couple, that your financial actions were vindictive and destructive, that you no longer appear able to make reasoned decisions." Natalie gripped my hand more tightly. "Aunt Eleanor, they convinced a handful of guests to sign. Most do not understand what truly happened that night. They only saw an older woman confronting newlyweds. But there is good news, Harold interjected, his smile sharply at odds with the gravity in the room. You have more allies than they think. He raised his phone and showed me a screen that stunned me. Harold. What is this? I asked, peering at what looked like a social media clip with tens of thousands of views. Remember how many guests were filming? He said. Some of those videos have gone viral. People are not seeing a senile woman attacking an innocent couple. They are seeing a dignified elder exposing years of manipulation and abuse. Amelia leaned in to read the comments. Eleanor. The responses are overwhelmingly in your favor, praising your courage, your composure, your boundaries. Many are sharing stories of their own families. You have become a symbol of resistance to the exploitation of seniors. Marcus nodded. Public sentiment like this is invaluable if we end up in court. It is hard to brand someone incompetent when thousands applaud the logic and justice of her actions. His professional smile returned. And for the first time, I dared believe the legal fight might not be as lopsided as I had feared. There is something else, I said, committing to a decision I had weighed for 3 days. If Daniel and Savannah want a public battle, they are about to learn who they are up against. I walked to my desk and lifted the folder I had been assembling. I have consulted multiple attorneys who specialize in elder abuse. I have documented everything: the intimidating visits, the veiled threats, the scheme to dispossess me, and the slap. I laid out photographs of my swollen cheek taken right after the wedding, medical proof of the assault. If they want a war, I continued, steadier than I had felt in decades, they will get one on my terms, with my resources, and with the truth. And more than that, I added, surprising even myself with the resolve in my voice, I will finally do what I should have done years ago, tell my entire story publicly. People will see exactly what happens when greed masquerades as family love. A current of purpose filled the room, the shared certainty that justice was on our side, and we had the means to pursue it. 6 months after that night that cleaved my life into a before and an after, I sat in the city's most prominent television studio, waiting for the interview that would bring my story to the entire country. The program, Stories of a Lifetime, had reached out to Marcus after the wedding clips amassed more than 2 million views. My experience had become a national emblem of resistance to elder abuse within families. The journalist, Catherine Diaz, renowned for her integrity, reviewed her notes while technicians made their final lighting tweaks. Mrs. Whitaker, she said with a warm smile, you should know your courage has inspired thousands. We have received hundreds of letters from viewers who faced similar circumstances over these 6 months. Much had changed. The case Daniel and Savannah tried to build collapsed spectacularly once Marcus presented evidence of their plan to have me declared incompetent. They not only lost, they were fined for frivolous litigation and ordered to pay my legal fees $45,000. The financial collapse that followed was swift. Daniel lost his job after the scandal went public. Savannah attempted to launch an image consulting business, but the viral videos ruined her prospects. They were now in a modest one-bedroom out in the suburbs, piecing together part-time work while drowning in debt. We are live in 5 minutes. The director called. I looked at the cameras that would soon beam my story into millions of homes, feeling a braid of nerves and resolve. Beside me sat Marcus, ready to clarify the legal context. In the audience were Harold, Natalie, and Amelia, my pillars, these difficult months. The hardest part of the half year was Daniel's silence. After losing in court, he never called to apologize, never wrote to explain, never acknowledged the wrong. It was as if blaming me was easier than facing what he had done. Savannah, by contrast, reached out repeatedly. Her tone slid from legal threats to desperate pleas for money. Her last message, only 2 weeks earlier, said, Eleanor, we made mistakes, but we are family. Daniel is ill from stress and I am pregnant. Please do not let your grandchild grow up in poverty. The news pierced me. I would be a grandmother, but the child would be raised in a house steeped in resentment toward me. Yet I had learned the hardest lesson: you cannot rescue those who refuse to be saved. Trying only fuels the destruction. Mrs. Whitaker. 30 seconds. Catherine warned. I drew a long breath and thought of the letters that poured in after the videos went wide. Stories of elders whose children seized their finances, of parents blackmailed by irresponsible adult children, of grandparents threatened with losing access to grandchildren unless they paid up. We are live in 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. Catherine delivered her practiced introduction. Good evening, and welcome to Stories of a Lifetime. I am Catherine Diaz, and tonight we speak with Eleanor Whitaker, a 70-year-old woman whose story has gripped the nation and placed elder abuse within families at the heart of a national conversation. Mrs. Wandsworth Crosby's, Mrs. Wandsworth Crosby Perfed. Whitaker, she turned to me 6 months after the events at your son's wedding. How does it feel to know your story has inspired so many? Grateful, I said, my voice steadying as I spoke. Grateful that something as painful as losing my relationship with my son could help others in similar situations. For months, I felt isolated and unsure, wondering if I was the one in the wrong. Now I know my experience is far more common than we care to admit. Catherine nodded and glanced at her notes. Tell us about the years that led to that night when you began to sense that something in your relationship with your son and his fiancée was not right. It was the question I had awaited the chance to explain how emotional and financial abuse creep in gradually, almost invisibly. It starts small, I said. Recalling the early signs, love made me overlook comments about age, suggestions that I could no longer manage on my own, subtle pressures to make choices that benefited them. Abuse at home rarely begins with shouting or blows. It begins by eroding your confidence and making you doubt your own reality. Marcus leaned toward the microphone to add legal context. What Eleanor describes is a classic pattern in elder abuse matters. Psychological manipulation comes first, often cloaked as concern, and only later gives way to overt coercion. And the moment you decided to reveal your financial truth, Catherine asked. It was the question I knew was coming, the one that forced me to name the hardest decision of my life. The slap. I answered simply when Savannah struck me in the middle of the ballroom before 130 people for refusing to hand over my keys. She crossed a line I could not ignore. In that instant, I realized this was no longer about shielding my family from consequences. It was about protecting myself from ongoing abuse. The interview ran 45 minutes. Touching every strand of the story, our choice to live simply for privacy, the years of secret support I provided, the plot to have me declared incompetent, and the legal battle that followed. Each answer aimed not only to recount what happened, but to educate others about warning signs and resources. Near the end, Catherine asked the hardest question. Mrs. Whitaker, do you have a message for your son? If he is watching tonight, I looked straight into the camera. Aware there was a chance Daniel was listening. Daniel, if you hear this, I know that I still love you. I will always love you because you are my son. But love does not mean letting you abuse me. Love does not mean surrendering my dignity for your convenience. Love does not mean becoming a victim of your greed. The door to my heart remains open, but only if you can enter as the honorable man I tried to raise you to be. Only if you can meet my eyes and take full responsibility. Only if you can show you have learned that family rests on love and respect, not opportunism and manipulation. I turned briefly to the broader audience. And to those who recognize themselves in my account, you have the right to dignity at any age, the right to decide about your money, your home, your life, the right to set boundaries with relatives who mistreat you, and the right to seek help when those boundaries are violated. When the cameras went dark, the crew broke into applause. Catherine hugged me, eyes bright with tears. Eleanor, that was one of the most powerful interviews I have ever conducted. It will change lives. Marcus nodded, satisfied that we had accomplished something larger than a legal victory. Driving home with Harold, Natalie, and Amelia, I felt a peace I had not known in years. I had spoken my truth. I had used my pain for the good of others. Whatever might come with Daniel, I knew I had chosen rightly. "Aunt Eleanor," Natalie said from the back seat, "I am proud of you. You turned the worst experience of your life into protection for thousands." Her words echoed in my heart as we reached my door. The apartment Savannah once coveted felt like home again, not because of a court ruling, but because I finally valued myself enough to demand the respect I deserve. I had learned that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to accept you may lose it. As I prepared for bed, I understood I had set the most important example of my life. It is never too late to stand up for yourself. You are never too old to demand dignity, and real love sometimes calls for the hardest choices. My story had concluded, but my life had just begun anew. 2 years have passed since that night that split my life in two. I write these lines from the same balcony where I once watered plants and reflected on the silent indignities I thought a mother must endure. How different the world appears when you finally place a firm price on your dignity. The morning unfolded as it has for the last 18 months. With a call from Carmen, coordinator of the Eleanor Whitaker Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. Yes, I chose to give the foundation my name, funding it with part of the inheritance I redirected. Eleanor. "We have 23 new cases this week," Carmen reported, in that blend of sadness and resolve that marks this work. The pattern is the same: adult children pressuring elderly parents for property or cash. Every file that lands on my desk feels like looking into a mirror of the past. Yesterday, I reviewed the case of a 72-year-old woman whose daughter persuaded her to sell her home for her own good, only to funnel the proceeds into a failed business and a European vacation. The day before yesterday, it was a 69-year-old man whose twins weaponized his love for family. "If you do not lend us $50,000, you will never see your grandchildren again." The irony is not lost on me. I have transformed the worst chapter of my private life into the most purposeful work I have ever done. The foundation has helped more than 400 older adults reclaim control of their finances, their homes, and most crucial of all, their self-respect. We now have dedicated attorneys, social workers, psychologists, and a support web I wish had existed when I felt so alone and bewildered. Harold is still my closest neighbor, although he is also the foundation's vice president now. His 72 years seem newly charged with energy since he began giving talks on how to recognize manipulation within families. Eleanor. He told me last week as we reviewed case files. "I never imagined my golden years would involve turning into a detective for dysfunctional households, but it is the finest adventure I have had." Natalie moved into the apartment next door a year ago. After a divorce from a marriage that lasted only 8 months, she decided she needed to live close to the bravest person she knows. Serving as the foundation's director of education has given her a purpose she never found in a conventional classroom. Aunt Eleanor. She tells me often, "You showed me that sometimes true family is not about blood, but about those who choose to honor you without conditions." The public reach of my story has produced outcomes I never anticipated. The book I wrote with an investigative journalist became a national bestseller. When Love Hurts, An Elderly Woman Fights Back has sold more than 200,000 copies. And every royalty check goes straight to the foundation. The letters I receive from readers are living proof that my experience echoed inside thousands of homes where silence once ruled. Marcus remains my financial advisor, and he now serves as the foundation's chief accountant as well. His expertise from steering the legal battle with Daniel has become indispensable for guiding others through similar storms. "Mrs. Whitaker," he told me at our monthly meeting, "we have recovered more than $3 million in property and savings that abusive relatives had taken. The question everyone asks in interviews and in private conversations is whether I miss Daniel. The answer is layered and painful. I miss the boy he was, the young man who showed flashes of decency and honor. I miss the illusion of the family I believed we had. but I do not miss the recent years of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and steady contempt. Daniel has tried to contact me exactly 3 times in these 2 years. The first was 6 months after the television interview, when some coworkers apparently saw the broadcast and began treating him differently. The second was when his son, my grandson Oliver, was born 14 months ago. The third came 3 months back, when Savannah left him, taking the baby and half of their scant belongings. Each call was a request for money, never a genuine apology, never an admission of harm. His thinking has not changed. He frames his troubles as injustices done to him rather than the outcome of his own choices. Our last conversation lasted fewer than 5 minutes and ended with, "Mom, your pride matters more to you than your grandson." I answered with a clarity that startled even me, Daniel. "My dignity matters exactly as much as my grandson. And I hope one day he learns that lesson better than you did." It was the first time I had ever hung up on my son, and strangely, it felt liberating. The subject of Oliver is the one that can still bring me to tears. He is 14 months old and does not know me. When Savannah left, she took every family photograph, including the few pictures I had of him. I established a college trust in his name, managed by Marcus, available when he turns 18. Whatever our relationship may be then, maybe. Amelia often says during our weekly dinners, when Oliver is older, he will seek his own answers and find the courage to meet his grandmother. Amelia has become my closest confidant, especially because she too set hard boundaries with destructive relatives a decade ago. What astonishes me most about these 2 years is how dramatically my body and mind have healed. In those final years with Daniel and Savannah, I developed chronic insomnia, relentless headaches, and an anxiety that kept me on permanent alert. My physician says my latest results mirror the stress profile of a woman 10 years younger. Eleanor, Dr. Hernandez told me at my last checkup, "It is remarkable how the body responds when we remove toxic stressors. Your blood pressure is excellent. Your sleep is restorative. Even your posture has improved." He is right. I walk taller. My voice has grown firmer, and my hands no longer shake when I make consequential choices. The flower shop where I once worked closed a year ago, but I found a new love in the community garden I helped establish in our building. I teach other elders about medicinal herbs and organic methods. It keeps me grounded, rooted in the earth, and surrounded by people who value accumulated wisdom rather than dismiss it as out of date. My routine now includes 3 days a week at the foundation, 2 days visiting the homes of seniors who need emotional support, and weekends devoted to drafting my second book. This one focuses on practical strategies to detect and prevent financial abuse within families, drawn from the cases we have handled. The apartment once targeted by greed has become a place of quiet and creativity. I converted Daniel's old room into an office where I meet those seeking guidance. The walls are lined with thank you notes, photos of families we helped reconcile in healthy ways, and certificates from the universities where I have given lectures. One of the most rewarding parts of this season has been mentoring older women who face situations like mine. Margaret, 74, came to us 6 months ago after her son sold her car without permission to cover gambling debts. We worked together for 3 months. Last week, she sent a photograph of herself beaming beside a car she bought with her own savings after we recovered the funds legally. "Eleanor," Margaret wrote, "you taught me that boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival. You taught me that self-respect is not selfishness, it is necessary. You taught me that it is never too late to stand up for yourself." Her words reminded me why the pain was worth enduring. Looking back over these 2 years, I know my story does not end with the tidy reconciliation, where everyone embraces and the credits roll. What it has instead is better authenticity, reclaimed dignity, and a purpose that reaches beyond my own hurt. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love for oneself is walking away from those determined to cause harm. If I could send a message to the past, to the Eleanor who stepped into that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I would tell her, be brave. What comes next will hurt. but on the far side is a life more truthful than you ever imagined. Peace is waiting. The peace that comes from knowing you will never again allow anyone to treat you as disposable. Tonight, as I finish these reflections, I look forward with renewed hope. Tomorrow I meet with senators to discuss new protections against familial abuse of elders. Next week I will open our foundation's 3rd regional center. Next month I begin filming a documentary series on this issue for national broadcast. My life at 70 is richer, more meaningful, and more genuine than it was at 68. I have learned that the end of a toxic bond is not a loss, it is a liberation. I discovered that true family is as much chosen as inherited. And I have proven it is never too late to compose a new chapter of your own story. When people ask whether I regret what I did that night, my answer never changes. Did you enjoy my story, and from which city are you listening? Let us meet in the comments. If the story moved you, you can support my work with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more accounts like this. Thank you, sincerely, for your kindness. I look forward to your thoughts about this journey. On the screen, you will find 2 new life stories I highly recommend. There is much more on my channel. Do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.